Hey there everyone, let's talk Yakuza. So, very recently I finished playing Yakuza Kiwami over on the stream, and I want to give a little bit of a review about it real quick. Obviously, just like normal, we're going to start off with a spoiler-free summary of the game in general, and then we'll get into some of the brass tacks about what works, what doesn't, what I liked, what I thought could have been done better. So, first of all, the summary review, whatever you want to call it. I really liked Yakuza Kiwami. I don't think it's quite as strong as Yakuza 0, but I think that's out of necessity. Because it was a remake of the first Yakuza game, then they couldn't really change the story of the first Yakuza game, and obviously, the first one they made, they didn't know what they were doing yet. They got better with time, and so the story of 0 is a lot more interesting and convoluted. The story of Yakuza Kiwami is fairly straightforward. You start off, something happens, you go to prison for a little bit. This is all stuff that the first like 5 minutes. Like I said, there's no real spoilers. You come out and you find out that there's a situation that's going on, and you chase the situation, and when you finally come to the end of it, you fight the final boss. Like, there's not a lot of twists and turns on the way. There's a couple of things that are, oh wow, really? But for the most part, the story plays out about the same way that you expect, which is problematic, but at the same time, again, it's the first game of the series. Of course, it's not going to be as involved as 0, which is like the 5th, 6th, 7th game in the series. I don't actually know. There's a lot of them. So they've gotten better over time, and it shows. But the systems work pretty well. The combat is just as enjoyable as it was in 0. It's really interesting to see the progression of the game when you play through Kiwami, because it's using 0's engine, but whenever they remade Yakuza in Kiwami, they were super specific about it. Like, almost a frame-by-frame recreation of the major scenes. And you can tell, there's some of the scenes that just feel a little bit off. And they feel off because they are emulating the style that the PlayStation 2 had to show stuff, because the PlayStation 2 wasn't really able to handle as much detail. So some of the cutscenes just feel a little bit weird, and it's actually really awesome to run into that, because it lets you sort of see how far we've come as gaming, because every time we go to a cutscene, you get a fully HD remastered cutscene, but it's still the same cutscene. All of the pieces of the cutscene have changed. They've redone all the models. They've redone all the sceneries. They've redubbed the sounds. They've redid the recording. Like, everything is sparkly and new, but the actual guts of the cutscene, the way the scene is laid out, is still PS2 style. And it's really interesting and fascinating to go through that. I like it a lot. The biggest issue that I think that you'll have with Kiwami overall is that going back and forth between modern and old, because you can easily tell whether a scene was in the first game or whether it's one of the extra scenes they added to this, because they didn't want to change Kiwami or the original Yakuza, but they definitely expanded on it. They added in new scenes, they added in the extra padding or extra dialogue to existing scenes, but they didn't change any of the dialogue that was there, I think. It's a little bit hard to say, because the first Yakuza they actually dubbed when it came over to English, and the dub didn't do very well. So there are a few scenes that the language is a little bit different, but I'm honestly not sure if that is them updating the dialogue, or if the original dub was just a really bad translation from the Japanese. I could see either. And I actually think it's probably the latter. I think it's the dub did not do a great job, and so going forward they said, we're not doing that again. That was not a good thing. So that is my relatively spoiler-free summary. I realize it was really short, but there's a lot of things we need to get into, and I don't want to be here talking forever. So we're now getting into a little bit of a spoiler zone. The first bit of spoilers, though, are actually, I want to talk about the problems that happened because 0 now exists, that didn't actually happen in the original Yakuza. Specifically, at the very beginning of the game, there's a event that happens, and again, we're in spoilers, so I can talk about it. The main character, Kiryu's love interest, Yumi, gets abducted and more or less raped. I mean, they say forced himself upon her, so it's possible just molested, but I'm going to assume rape, because that certainly seems the context, by the head of the Dojima clan, of which Kiryu is a member. Now, in the original game, this was heinous and terrible, and obviously your response is to hate Dojima and want him dead, and hey, sure enough, he dies shortly thereafter. But it works from a storyline perspective. Unfortunately, now that Zero exists, and now that Patriarch Dojima knows that Kiryu has at one point gone against the Dojima clan, been hunted by the entirety of the Dojima clan, fought them all to a standstill, to the point where the, clan that is over the Dojima clan, the Tojas, forced Kiryu to be forgiven. It's just like, why the hell would he choose that girl of all the girls in Tokyo to have his way with? Like, leave Kiryu's friends the fuck alone! Your whole clan can't stop Kiryu if you piss him off! And it really leaves you with not fully understanding, like, why would the Patriarch do that? It makes no sense. And it's only an issue because Zero exists. It's only an issue because there's that history that didn't actually exist when they wrote the plot of Yakuza, but still, having come from Zero, it was super weird and confusing for me, and I didn't understand why it happened. The other one that kind of shines and shows that way is series favorite Goro Majima, because you could very, very clearly see the difference in the Majima that was presented in Yakuza 0, which was a zany, fun-loving, wacky, kind of rival character. He would do what he wanted, but he was genuinely a good person. He genuinely did not want people to suffer unnecessarily. He enjoyed fighting, and whenever a fight would come, he went all out and just enjoyed himself. But the concept of, like, there's a scene that happens kind of late in the game where Majima grabs a girl and holds a knife to her throat, and that just is so not in keeping with the Majima that exists in Zero. The Majima in Zero would never take a hostage, and very, very much goes against the Yakuza and believes that innocents should not be put in harm's way over Yakuza business. Similarly, very early in the game, you hear people talking about Majima and how he's a lech, and he just looks at people with a perverted eye, and you could just blatantly see that, what's on his mind, and it's kind of disgusting, really. And again, that's a side of Majima that never really existed in Yakuza 0. In Yakuza 0, he runs a cabaret club, and he talks to, but he never is overly sexual with them or makes them uncomfortable. Although, unless you're choosing his responses, in which case you can have him say that, but even when he does that, they tend to not really go for it. So it's a little bit weird, and again, I realize the reason it's like that is because Yakuza didn't change any of the established cutscenes, and Majima's character was fully developed in Yakuza 2 through 5. So the one that shows up in 0 is this developed Majima, but it is awkward going from Yakuza 0 to Yakuza Kiwami and seeing Majima kind of characterized like this in a way that doesn't make a lot of sense for him. Now, let's move on to Kiwami itself. Overall, like I said, I really like Kiwami. As always, I'm going to nitpick the things that I didn't like, because I think it's really boring to come to this video and I'm just like, yeah, Yakuza Kiwami's awesome! You should play it! It's great! No problems! 10 out of 10! You don't want to hear me say that. You want to actually hear, like, constructive deconstruction of the game and what works and what doesn't. So, what doesn't? First and foremost, most relevantly, oh my gosh, they added a new mechanic in Yakuza Kiwami that sucks. I hate it. Periodically, while you're fighting someone, they will go into a state where they start to heal. You can stop them from doing that by unleashing a special move which will interrupt their healing, called a heat action. The problem is, to do that, you either have to get some piece of equipment, a chair, piece of wood, a street sign, something, and just bash them over the head with it if you have enough, if your heat gauge is filled up enough in order to actually stop it. So there's the first problem. Your heat gauge falls every time you use that heat action, or every time you take damage, and it refills as you do damage. So if you've happened to get hit recently, and they start healing, you have to hit them enough to fill your heat gauge, stop, go find something in order to bash them over the head with in order to get them to stop healing. Or you have to have one of these special moves to stop their healing unlocked. This was not in Yakuza 0, and I really don't think it added much. It just lengthened the length of fights. That's very good English there. It lengthened the length. It just padded out the fights and make them take longer. So already the enemies have just massive, massive, massive hit point pools. And now they would stop and start healing. And the other big problem is if you're in the middle of a combo, it takes Kiryu a second to stop punching so you can actually use that move. So especially late game, they'd heal like half a bar even if you were ready to stop them. I just really feel like that particular aspect of the game didn't add anything. It was just, it added frustration and that was it. And if your big change from the previous game is an extra dose of frustration, you don't need to do that. Just don't do that. The other issue, and from what I understand, I did go back and watch some of Yakuza gameplay video. After, obviously, I only watched stuff I'd already played in Kiwami. I didn't want to spoil myself, but the big difference between them, or one of the big differences between them, is the game seems really confused about whether or not guns matter. You will have certain cutscenes where Kiryu just charges guys with guns, jumps between rooftops, people are shooting like crazy, but then in the actual game, if Kiryu gets shot, he will yell out in pain, fall to his knees, clutch his side. It's like a 4-second animation of getting shot and getting back up. And so in some cutscenes, guns are very relevant and dangerous. Sometimes Kiryu doesn't give a flying hell about them. In the original Yakuza gameplay, Kiryu would get shot and it did like more damage than getting punched, but not a lot. But then in Kiwami, getting shot really just took you out of the fight. It was terrible. And there are 2 fights in specific where your opponent actually uses a gun, and they're just the most awful fights to go through, because Kiryu spends the entire time yelling out in pain, falling to the ground and getting back up, and half the time he'll get shot as soon as he gets back up as well. They're awful fights. I hate them. And they just, again, it slows the game down. And I don't want guns to be irrelevant, but I feel like the game designers, when they made the first Yakuza, knew that the guns would be a very prominent part of fights, and were like, making them matter this much, but yet keeping enemies that use them like they're, you know, turkey, I don't know which would be worse. If you have all of these fights where the guns don't, like Kiryu's getting shot like crazy and doesn't seem to care, or you have these fights where Kiryu cares, he cries out in pain, he falls to his knees 30 to 40 times over the course of the fight. Like, both of those just end up being ridiculous. The other issue, and granted, this is an issue in both Yakuza and this one, so they couldn't do much about it, but there is a very kind of touching and sad scene that happens partway through the game, where Kiryu's only real friend, a guy named Shinji, ends up getting killed because he's kind of going against Nishikiyama's, which is another character's clan, in order to help you out because he really respects you. And it's touching, and obviously when he dies, it makes me choke up a little. But only a little bit, because the entire game he would show up a couple of times, and that was it. And they added a few more times he showed up, but for the most part, he didn't really get to spend a lot of time with you. His death affected me a lot more because he's got so much screen time in Yakuza 0. In Yakuza 1, he's mostly just a mook that gives you information every now and again. So when they stop and have this really tragic, oh, Shinji gave his life in this fight for you and he didn't make it, and I'm just sort of like, well, that sucks, but he had no real personality. Like, way too often I feel like games just treat, like, you know, trust the player to feel like every human life is valuable, and anytime someone dies, it should affect them. Except they don't actually spend the time to make you care about the character before they kill them off, and so in the end, it doesn't affect anything, and it doesn't affect you, and you don't care about it, because you're just like, well, do you know how many people I've beaten the snot out of in this game? Like, the guy was in organized crime. He knew what was a possibility. So, again, I don't want to seem callous or that I don't care about what happened to Shinji, but I'm just really tired of games acting like every single character death should be this terrible thing for us, because frankly it shouldn't, and frankly it won't. And lastly, I know I've already talked about Majima once. They added a system in it, both I think in order to lessen the impact of this like crazy, pseudo-sadistic and perverted Majima, called Majima Everywhere, where they have a lot of extra Majima content that happens. And Majima just shows up all the time, but of course he's the zany Yakuza 0 Majima, in order to, like I said, lessen the blow of this other weird Majima that shows up in the official cutscenes. And I'm glad they did it, and I understand why they did it, but at the end of the day, it's still a system of you've got two different Majimas, and frankly, you get kind of sick of it. Like, literally, towards the end of the game, he got so hard that there'd be times where I would heal up, go to fill up on healing items, go out, fight Majima, beat Majima, go into a store in order to eat some food to heal from fighting Majima, except Majima's in the store, so I have to fight him again. And then when I leave, Majima's outside, I'm just like, will you leave me the hell alone? It took me like 3 hours at one point to get from one quest objective to another one, because I kept having to go back for healing items because I kept running into Majima. And like, I love Majima to death. He's probably he's my favorite character in the Yakuza series. But they don't, like, he started to overstay his welcome in this game. I'm like, Majima, go get a hobby. I liked the system, and I thought the system was interesting, and it added a lot of humor and fun to the game that was, I won't say lacking, but you could tell the first Yakuza was a much more serious affair than Yakuza Kiwami ended up being, because they added a lot of humor to it, because there just wasn't a lot in the original game. My favorite side mission in the game was definitely the Badass Dad. So that was an amazing mission, and I deeply enjoyed it. It was really fun. It was a great little aside to see. The other thing I think that they did a very good job. A lot of the cutscenes they added. So in Yakuza 0, your blood brother is a guy named Nishikiyama, and he also features in Yakuza Kiwami, but your relationship has changed with him. And throughout the game, you get cutscenes of what happened in order to change him. And it was really good, and it was really, it fleshed his character out a lot, and it really let you see the transition he had to go through. And it was great. But why the hell didn't they do that with Majima? Majima changes significantly between the two, and I know why he changed, but I would have really liked to actually see what Majima went through. I don't know why they didn't give Majima more actual character development, because they had his character change so much between the two games, but they just are like, well, this was the old Majima, here's the new Majima, and we'll kind of give you both, but not really. And I really wish they had done that, but at the end of the day, I just want to go back to, I complain a lot about little things, but hopefully in reading that, listening to this, you can hear that I'm complaining a lot about little things. The Yakuza Kiwami is not as good as Yakuza 0. If you have not played any Yakuza games, I heartily recommend 0. It's either coming to Steam or it's already in Steam. I'm not actually sure. I think it's already in Steam. Play Yakuza 0. It is amazing. It's good. I like it. And you'll like it too if you have good taste. But Yakuza Kiwami, Sega got kind of trapped by the success of Yakuza 0, and they didn't want to change Yakuza, but they wanted to expand it, and I think they did just about the best job they could have. There are a few things I don't like, but they don't ruin the game. When you get to the end of the game, you always come away with like one of three feelings. Generally speaking, the two most extreme are either you're very content, you enjoyed the playthrough, and you have a new game that holds a special place in your heart and in your memories. You have a game that you're just like, that was really well done. And this is not like one of my all-time favorite games, but it was really well done. My complaints are very minor, and for the most part I even understand why they did them. You come away with thinking, there are things this game could have done better, but not thinking, wow, this game really messed up on this. And you've definitely heard my reviews. There are times that I'm really mad at a game for what it did. I'm not mad at Yakuza Kiwami. I feel like Sega is really knocking the ball out of the park. They're handling this series with a lot of love and respect, and it shows. And we're in an era right now where there's so many big gaming companies that are doing everything they can to cash in on their most prominent properties, and they just kind of shovel out crap. Konami's really bad about this. I don't think I have to tell you. You know, it's just like after Kojima left, they released a Silent Hill pinball game or something, and then they released Silent Hill Downpour, which everyone agrees is terrible. And they're just like, let's just slap beloved names on things and see if we can make them better. I forget which the publisher is, but they released a Dungeon Keeper on Facebook who was just the same thing. It's just like, here, a lot of microtransactions. You guys like this series, right? Give us money! And to have Sega come along and say, no, we're going to re-release this game, but we're going to give it the honor it deserves. We're going to give it the respect it deserves. This is a game that a lot of people spend a lot of time and a lot of people find beloved. We're not just going to throw a remake together in order to get all of our fans to repurchase it. We're going to really give them something worth playing. And I really appreciate Sega for that. You know, all of my complaints come out of love for the overall game, and I want to see it perfect. But I don't walk away from this thinking that Sega did a bad job or Sega's trying to cash in. Sega also loves this series, and that's all you can ask for from a game developer. You're never going to be able to get a perfect game or a perfect remake because there's always financial things to consider. But I did get a wonderful game. Thanks for tuning in.